the theme of this breakout is, or this panel is, preparing for interviews. Actually, we're talking about interviews, but I actually think it's more than preparing for interviews, because all throughout your career, you're going to be doing networking, and every time you're networking people, it's like an interview. So that first impression matters a lot. Paul, do you want to start, and then we'll go over and then come back?
Sure. I'm Paul McKinney. I'm with IBM. I've worked at a number of companies before that. I suppose this is my third career, if you count my first career in agriculture and my second one in retail, although that was in grade school and high school, so who knows. But we'll talk some more later.
All right, I'm John Teuber. I'm a project manager at HCL Exxon. We do EAS consulting. I've worked on like 3 or 4 different projects. It's exciting, I guess.
Yeah, so my name is Chauncey Faulkner. I'm a graduate of the program about 1.5 years ago. I am a software engineer at Slalom Consulting, and I'm working on my second project, and this is my second engineering position post-graduation. So.
I'm Jennifer Burns. I'm still a current student in the program, and I'm a software engineer at Micron Technology. I'm hoping to help you folks out because I've gone through the internship process a couple times with Intel and Micron, so I hope I can give you some information about that.
Hey, I'm Arpit, and as I told you before coming here, I worked in industry for 7 years, and I developed, designed, and tested software for petroleum companies, golf companies, so many law and justice systems that different states here use in USA. And also I work for Indian Space Research Organization. So this is my background. And if you think that being a computer scientist, you may not have a cool job, then for like almost 1 year in my job, half of the time I was outside in the golf field. So if you are lucky, you may have one. So.
Okay, let's start by, I think we'll just go down the panel, but maybe give your best interview advice or an example of maybe an experience that you had and how that worked or didn't work, or whatever you want to share first about that.
It's not only to know the concept, but it's really important to how to apply those concepts given a particular scenario.
So I have, I think, 2 points that might be helpful. I was originally a music major, and so I was a band director, high school band director for a while. So my first set of interviews, I thought, what could I possibly give to this company after a year of studies, which I think is probably a pretty common thing to think. And what I realized is that companies are willing to invest in you if you show the willingness to learn, and you have other skills to bring into the company, communication skills, general maturity, which I think we all have, compared to somebody that went straight to college, got the job. So that's the first thing I'd like to express is if you think that you don't have those skills, maybe you don't have the technical skills, but those will come and they'll see that in you. They'll see that you have that potential. And I think that's really important to know. And then the second thing is I actually ended up getting my first interview at Intel because I had a student whose mom worked at Intel. So it's still important to really talk to the people around you and get to know people because you never know where that opportunity may lie. She just happened to say, oh yeah, I work at Intel. Are you interested in me getting you hiring manager information? Well, yeah, of course. So seek that stuff out. It's there.
Yeah, I kind of want to add to that too, because I know a lot of people in the field who are software engineers, and they really like to refer people. So use your connections. I mean, I used to think that that was kind of a weird, I felt really uncomfortable reaching out to somebody I barely knew for submitting my resume to their hiring manager, but it's really common. I mean, I know people who would practically beg for resumes to submit to their hiring managers or things like that. So that might not be common across the board, but that's been my experience. So my interview advice would be that if you are presented with a question that you are not familiar with that specific technology, think about what the actual problem is and try to apply something that you do know. So for example, if they ask you a question in a particular language, and you don't know that language, try to think about something that you do know and solve the problem that way so that they can see you kind of thinking about the problem. Because languages, technologies, those are things that you can learn, but the problem solving is what they want to actually see you working through. So that'd be my biggest advice. You've got yours. Okay.
Yeah, we're doing per table mics now, I guess. I'd like to kind of emphasize a couple of things were said over there. Interview skills are really important. They're important not just getting the job, but also getting new jobs within your job, new assignments, and so on. But I have never gotten a job based on just a cold interview. The only way I've gotten a job is if I did an interview and knew some people so that there was a trust connection. Now, I haven't changed jobs that often. The last time I changed jobs was in 1990, I guess, unless you count being acquired by IBM. But all the things these guys are saying about networking is really, really important. And yet, being able to make a good first impression, because you aren't always going to be inside your network, is important as well. So you want to try to use both of those to your best advantage. Your connections within your network and making a good impression, demonstrating that you can solve their problem. I mean, the reason they're hiring somebody is because they have a problem that is painful enough. They'd rather give up some money to get the problem solved than to live with the problem. So by interviewing and by having trust through your network, you need to convince them that you're the person to solve that problem for them.
All right. I agree with everything they said. Networking is probably the single most important thing, in my opinion, to get a job in software. All the people I graduated with, that's how they got their positions. Secondly, first impressions. Typically, when you first meet someone that you want to network with, you have 3 or 4 minutes to convince them that you're capable of doing the same thing that they do. And, that's really important because you're not going to get another first impression. Also, specifically to interviews, when they ask you questions, I found the easiest way to go about answering it is to outline every single thing first before you even start trying to answer the question. Because the worst thing to do is to start answering a question and then get caught up at where you are. So if you do that, if you outline everything before you start trying to answer the question, it'll save you a lot of time at the end of the question, and you'll be able to actually give them an answer to what they say or what they ask.
Okay, so I think this is a good time to sort of open it up and let you ask some questions. So anybody have a question? It can be anything.
In my case, the only time I did that would have been in '86, and I got a job in the Bay Area, having lived in Corvallis. And I had a connection. There was a classmate who I'd gone to school with who was working at that company, and so there was some connection there. Failing that, I'm assuming you don't have that sort of a thing since you're asking the question. But the first thing would be think hard about what is there. Sometimes it may not be obvious, but maybe an old classmate, maybe from high school or whatever, actually lives there and maybe knows somebody. Maybe they're married to somebody. Maybe they're in the same club as somebody else. So if you know somebody there, and maybe search a little bit and see, try to look that way. The other thing is to do your homework. Again, they're hiring you because they have a problem that's so ugly that they want to pay some money to get rid of the problem, right? The first step towards building credibility is to convince them that you know about the problem. So what are they running into? Who are they? What are they trying to do? How do they make money? Or how do they, if they're not maybe they're a commercial organization, how do they gain political or other support? Coming in there, demonstrate you understand what they're up against.
If you really don't know anybody there, aside from researching the problem, what you could do is utilize the LinkedIn network from graduates from this program. That's where I would start.
Yeah, so I think along with what Chauncey said, using your network, and I also, the job that I got at Micron, that's my one situation where I didn't have any networking experience, and I just applied to every job or internship I saw that really fit skills that I knew that I had, and I think that that's an important thing too, is don't be scared to really spend the time creating a great resume and that LinkedIn profile, and everything that you have on social media, having it really professionally done, things like that.
So what I would do after an event like this is I would connect on LinkedIn. I would send a message and I would say, hey, it was nice to meet you. I would maybe recap what we talked about so that there was some sort of refresher so that, you weren't kind of one of a million faces. And then you can have your connection that way. And then, in your little message, you could say, in 6 months, I'll be looking for positions. Maybe we can keep this line of communication open or something like that. I don't know, something maybe that sounds better than that, but you know what I mean. So that's what I would do.
I would definitely add to that. If you're going to connect with them on LinkedIn, I would do it within a week. Just to keep it fresh in their mind, the conversation that you guys had. And also to that, don't be afraid a couple months down the road just to, refresh, see if they have a few minutes to talk, about what they're currently working on and that kind of stuff, and have a conversation. I've had people, send me messages, and, I've met up with them for coffee or whatever to talk about my work and that sort of thing. It's just getting out there. It's kind of cold calling, but it's, you'll get used to it one day.
All right, and Justin, can I have you go ahead and introduce yourself since...
Yeah, sure. My name is Justin Ihara. Good morning. Thanks for having me. I work for MSCI, which is a subsidiary of Biotronic, and I was in the program previously, just like everyone here. So,
Okay.
And go ahead and go through the whole spiel of information for interviews and whatnot, or are we past that point?
We're past that point, but do you want to go ahead and do your thing?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So I'm sure everyone is in the room because they want to get a job. I think that's pretty safe to say. So a few things that I found going through quite a few interviews, a lot of phone interviews, interviews in person as well, is basically you need to know a couple different things. First off, you need to know yourself. I know that sounds pretty basic, but when you get asked the question, what is the thing that you're most proud of in your undergraduate, career as far as computer science, and you come up with a big blank, that doesn't look so good. Another thing you should know, and this is kind of basic for interviews, strengths and weaknesses. So it's always good to know what you're good at, but also have a few things in the back pocket of what you aren't good at. Know what programs or programming language you like to program in. That will be a question they will ask you. They say, well, what are you good at? Are you good at Java? Are you good at C#, etc.? So those are all good things to know. Also, you want to know your company. So let's say you're trying to apply for a company that only codes in C#. Maybe you don't want to tell them that you only know HTML. That might be a good thing, right? Also, you want to know what's important to them. So their mission statement, get to know your interviewers as well. So your interviewer might not have a lot of technical background, so if you go into the minutia of all your code, they're probably going to get this glazed over look, and you won't be very effective with them. Be likable. I know that's really easy to say, but a lot of times if you have two different candidates, you're going to see a lot of people that have, 4.0s or have a lot of experience, but they're also going to be judging you whether or not they can work with you, or maybe if they're a manager, whether or not their team is going to be able to work with you as well. Also know your vocab. So one of the quickest ways they're going to be able to judge whether or not you know what you're doing is they're going to ask you something like one of those CS 161 or 62. Some of you may have taken CS 165, right? So they're going to ask you, like, what is polymorphism? And I see some people go, I don't remember what that is, right? Yeah, so they're going to ask you these questions, and if you come up with a blank, if it's a phone interview, you can possibly have the internet in front of you, a little bit of Wikipedia. you can help yourself out. And one last thing, or a couple things more, I guess. Have some canned questions for your interviewers. So it's a dialogue. You don't want them just to be asking questions of you and you just to be returning one-line answers. You want it to be a conversation. So ask them things like, hey, what's kept you at the company? Or have them sell it to you, right? Why is your company great? You know, what do you do? Okay. And lastly, internships. Now, some people, you know, you may be looking, hey, I want to go straight in and get a job. That's the first thing people think. Internships aren't a bad thing. They may have a little bit of a stigma, but they're a great way for you to get into the company. It's a lot easier, the bar is a lot lower, and it allows you to go in and have a little bit lower expectations, get your feet wet, but also it allows you to kind of check out the company and take a look and see what it's like. So if at the end of your 3 months, 6 months, year internship, you say, I don't think this is the company for me, then you can go ahead and leave the company, and it's not something you have to put on your resume of saying, oh, I was at this job for 6 months, and I just kind of left. So that's all I have for you guys. So kind of going back to that key project, if you have something you can show them, so something you've polished up, you know, you've commented it well, et cetera, it's structured well, you can always show them, say, hey, I did this. Also talking to them regarding technical information, that'll actually let them know. And don't be afraid to put in your experience that isn't necessarily related directly to CS. So if you've worked at previous jobs, use that as well.
I had several interviews and got several job offers and one internship offer before I even graduated. And it was my feeling that the companies that I interviewed for weren't really even all that interested in my previous experience. And so I think really what I did was I went in there and I had lots of practice standing up at a whiteboard solving problems before I went in for the interview. So I think that was really, really helpful because when I got in there and I was given a problem to solve on the whiteboard, I didn't freeze. I was able to get through the problem, even if I stumbled a little bit on a specific place, and I just asked a lot of questions. So I think when I went in there, I was just really vocal. I asked questions. I communicated my thought processes as well as I could, and I think that really showed my interviewers that I was thinking through the problem and just really a problem solver. And I think that's what did it for me.
So this is somewhat on topic. I just think this is an important thing regarding internships as well. I ended up ending my career as a teacher to pursue internships versus a full-time job. And I found that if I was given an internship and I actually asked the company, can I extend this internship for more than like a 3-month period? And it turns out that does happen. My internship with Intel got extended through a year. So it is possible to move into an internship and treat it like a full-time job and make a living wage in this field. And that actually ended up being what was best for me, is to actually go ahead and say, okay, I'm just going to jump in and do this internship thing. And it ended up pretty much feeling like a full-time job. Lots of companies will give you benefits for an internship. So I also recommend if you're kind of on the fence, well, I need to have a job while I'm going to school, is to go ahead and pursue those internships and ask the company for what is going to work best for you. And sometimes that will actually work out in your favor.
I also just want to add, for the internship position that I was offered, after that I was offered full-time positions, so I went back to the employer who offered me the internship because I really wanted to work there. And I said, hey, I got full-time offers. Is there any way that I can come in for a new interview and for a full-time position? And just asking, I was able to go in, do my interview, and I ended up given a full-time position. So I feel like you have options.
Well, I guess I'm not a graduate of the program, but I can't resist putting in, if you're trying to get work from an employer who's heavily into open source, and there's a fair number of them these days, having some contributions to a related open source project out there that they can see is really, really important.
I've never worked with a tech recruiter, but I know that I've talked to recruiters from within companies, and they use LinkedIn a lot. So they'll, click on somebody's profile, they'll see who they know, and they'll click on their profiles. I got contacted by recruiters from companies based on people that I was connected with on LinkedIn, and so another graduate of the program actually works at the same company that I do, and I think that he knew somebody at that company. He got contacted. I was connected through this other person, and so I got contacted. So it was a whole chain effect like that. So. Yeah, I don't know about that. I might do something like that. Yeah.
Don't be afraid.
Yeah.
Just don't give them an exclusive.
Because I think, and I have followed this practice, at my organization we have followed this practice, but it's like if there is a small team or mid-sized company, they don't have resources, like dedicated resource to have hundreds of people interviewed. So sometimes they give this work to certain recruiters, and they want them to narrow down people for them so that they can they want to interview only 10 or 15 people. So they ask recruiter to just go through the profile or do some research and narrow down to people. So they go through 100 resume but just send 10 people to the company. So it's a very common practice at least in software industry.
I think places that you would want to work will embrace unique characteristics you bring, whatever that is. So, the fact that you have a whole different discipline that you've studied before doing that, that's a diversity thing, right? The fact that you have some other interests, that should be kind of a diversity thing. I always kid that when we're hiring faculty for our program, if they represent another area of the world that we don't have represented, it's like, oh, this is great, now we'll have that part represented. Or if they have an interest, like they're a chef, it's like, oh, this is great, right? So I think if you're going to find a place that you want to work and that you're going to feel good, they're going to embrace those differences that make you, that's what you bring to the party. So I think you can, you probably don't want to that's not the whole thing about the interview, but you should be able to talk about it, and it should be fine, right? And it should be a place that you feel comfortable.
I would say also anything that highlights soft skills is a good thing, because in a group of a whole bunch of computer people, maybe people don't think, oh, soft skills, someone that can actually communicate or work in a team, that's really important. If you have previous experience that actually would say, hey, I can do that. Or if there's anything in your previous life experience that is applicable to the new job in a kind of roundabout way. For example, my company, we actually create implantable devices, medical devices. And previously I was an EMT in another life. And I thought, oh, well, that's not really, we don't need that, but it's nice that you have an understanding of what's going on. So you can leverage that.
If you show your passion, so basically if somebody is interviewing you, they are looking for what kind of competencies you are bringing to the table. So that is what they need to be looking at, not at any other thing. So if you show your passion and you do your best, that is pretty much what you need to do. And if they are the kind of people who are looking at other things, probably you shouldn't be working there. So that's how I see it.
Well, I think there's the other thing too is, and someone mentioned this in the panel, I think it's really important. When you go into an interview, you should view it as you're interviewing them too. And so when you go in and you ask people questions and you are actually interested and engaged, people respond very positively to that. So that's kind of part of selling yourself, is be interested in them and what does their company do and what do they do at the company. This goes both ways. And if you can do that, all of a sudden they'll say, wow, I really like that person. I think I could work with them.
I don't think it's ever too early to start looking for internships. Because if you wait until you're 7, 8 classes in, you missed out on the year or half a year of looking for internships already. I do think it's really important to have taken data structures and algorithms, though. Those 2 classes are like the foundation of most what you're going to get from most technical interviews and the questions that they ask you.
I also think part of it is the type of job or internship that you're looking for. If you're looking for a web dev type internship, you want to make sure that that's something you're comfortable with. In my case, data structures was really important, and then operating systems ended up being really beneficial for me too. But I agree with the data structures. I think that's a really good point. If you were to define a point in which to look for an internship, that's where I felt the most comfortable in my interviews. So I actually, my family decided that we were going to leave Portland, and so I got on the Beaver JobNet, actually, and started looking for jobs in areas, internships and jobs in areas that I was interested in moving to, and Micron was one of those places because I was interested in Colorado, and I ended up on their short list, I guess, because of my, they actually liked the fact that I had taken a computer architecture class. That's not always a common thing, apparently. So that's kind of caught their eye there. So I just applied for that job and got an interview there.
Well, I think Jennifer brought up Beaver JobNet. So that's available to all of you through OSU. So you can use all the same resources. Kyle, do you want to come up here? Yeah. And so there, we are constantly in contact with lots of companies. They're advertising there. If you're not from the area, and Jennifer was going to a different part of the country and still was able to access it there. But if you're in other parts of the country, there are similar things available to you. So Kyle, do you want to go ahead? Yeah.
Sure. So Beaver JobNet has changed its name since you did your search, and I'm so glad you brought it up. It's called Beaver Careers now, and if you haven't already set up an account with them, it's free. It's just a little bit of demographic information, so you can indicate whether you want to have information sent to you, automated based on search elements you're interested in. There are 2 features with Beaver Careers. Actually, there are a lot of features with Beaver Careers. It's the way you make an appointment with a career counselor. But in terms of doing your job search or job research or internship search and research, there are 2 features. One is actually searching open, active openings, so any postings that exist. But it's also a wonderful database. So any recruiter, any employer that has a relationship with OSU has actually put their information on the system so that you can search it and drill down all the way to contact information. You can learn about the company, you can get a sense of the postings they've posted previously, and you can get phone and email contact information for the people who have designated themselves to be contacts for OSU. Their job is to recruit people, so they want to hear from you. And a lot of students don't realize that that's a resource that's like gold. So if you want to know more about that, let me know, contact Career Services, but it's a fantastic resource, especially if you're relocating.
So through the School of EECS, we also have a couple of other resources available to you. One is a weekly newsletter, the weekly EECS News. How many of you have heard of that? Raise your hands. Oh. Amazing. How many of you have read it?
Oh, wow.
Better than I expected.
Typical student.
So for those of you who've read it, you may have noticed there's an employment section that includes internships as well as full-time jobs. We also have a group on LinkedIn for our EECS alums, but since you're students, you can be a part of that as well, and there are full-time jobs posted there as well. So it's another place to look, and a lot of the options on that page tend to be around the country. Oh, okay, yes, there's another resource Padma reminded me. We access after college. You can build a profile on there just like you can on LinkedIn. It's another way to access jobs and internships that are posted from companies around the nation. So just another resource. Keep them in mind. Start looking now. And if you haven't visited the Career Services resume site, they have a wealth of opportunities there for you. They have a lot of information on how to build a resume, how to prepare for interviews, all of that kind of thing. And you don't even have to be on campus. It's all on the web.
Okay, so I'm gonna take it from the perspective of my current specialty, which may or may not be helpful. However, if it is helpful, you need to thank the gentleman over in the corner there for 344, because that's operating systems. There is a website called lwn.net. LWN stands for Linux Weekly News, and they have articles every week where they talk about aspects, actually not just of the Linux kernel, but of open source in general. It's oriented more towards Linux kernel historically, so much so that if you're looking at a piece of Linux kernel trying to figure it out, it's not a bad strategy to search for the function calls and things like that in the source code, site:/lwn.net, to see if they've written something up. It's not like they've written everything about the whole 50 million lines of Linux kernel source code, but they've done a fair amount. There's a bunch of publications that are kind of hit and miss. So I'd recommend actually joining IEEE and ACM and getting at least the basic publications. And if you have a specialty in mind, getting those. My experience is that you'll get these magazines every month or so, and maybe once or twice a year there'll be something useful in them. However, that something useful can be worth the time you spent kind of glancing through it and saying, whatever, the rest of the time.
I don't think I've actually read any books. I really don't follow any newsletters either, but I can't remember the name off the top of my head, and I can get it to you later. But I do subscribe to a website that sends out technical interview questions every week, and I just, I can get it for you later. I don't remember off the top of my head, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat of not really reading books that often. I think I have a book in my office that helps keep my monitor at the correct height. But honestly, I would say there is one book off the top of my head. It kind of does the same thing as the weekly deal, but it's just a list of a whole bunch of things to keep you sharp. Make sure you are thinking about different processes and whatnot. And I'm sure you guys are all familiar with Stack Overflow. So
I have not read any books either. But basically every project I've worked on since I graduated has used a new technology that I was not familiar with prior to that. So I usually checked with the lead of my project, asked for any recommendations, and then just hit up Google to find any sort of documentation, tutorials, that kind of thing on whatever it is that I was going to be jumping into. So I use that a lot. And then also for preparing for interviews, I have a book that's it outlines a lot of the common algorithms, and so I use that a lot in preparing for interviews. I can't think of the exact title, though.
Okay, so at work, I usually just have the Python documentation up on a screen because that's most of what I'm working with. But a book that I think is a good book to read that kind of helps shape my idea of what I'm doing is a book called Code by Petzold. It's Petzold, and that's kind of like a nighttime reading that I did while I was actually, maybe about a year ago. That really helped me through computer architecture and some operating systems things. So I would recommend checking that out. That might be a good book for you. Code? Just Code.
So when I graduated maybe eight years ago, ASP.NET was everywhere. So for me, the most important book was Microsoft Certification 70315, ASP.NET. It was like you have to know it at that time, 8 years ago, otherwise you cannot survive basically. And because I belong to Microsoft technology all my career, I if you are interested, I'll suggest that now you don't have to read any book. Just go to MSDN Channel 9, and I think probably you'll know everything that you need to know if you want to work in Microsoft technology. Like video resources, you can follow it, you can do whatever they are doing, and you'll learn by yourself.
So if you like tutorials, videos, there's a site called Pluralsight. You have to pay for a subscription, but I know you can do kind of a demo. And they have videos on everything you can possibly imagine. And that was really helpful, especially when I was first getting started in the workforce. Pluralsight, Pluralsight.
Oh, I would say find that out way before the interview. So one way you can do is just try and get a contact within the company. I mean, you're going to meet a whole bunch of people today. That's one way of getting a contact within the company. And you can ask those kind of things ahead of time. Say, hey, is there a software that you guys use or a language that you use primarily? And even if that person may not know, they can point you in the direction of that person. And chances are if they're pointing you to someone else, that's good, because then you're getting closer to the group that you actually might be working with or interviewing with. Yeah, sometimes they will use proprietary software. I had to deal with that in my current job right now. But a lot of the same logic that you'll be using right now for your languages that you're programming in, it transfers over really well.
And I emphasize why you need to study the company that you will be interviewing. Not only that you have to study the company, but exactly the position that you are being interviewed for. And so many times, like if you have taken CS362, I suggest students like you have to like almost have separate resume for each and every position that you apply. Particularly, like let's say if you are applying for a web development position, you should emphasize the web development courses and project that you did. But you are applying for a software testing position, your resume should mention the assignments and work that you did in software testing course. So just look at the position and try to just customize your resume accordingly.
Yeah, I think sometimes we take that for granted, but this idea of researching the company, so you can go to the web. So what should you look at? You already know what the position description is, and you can tailor your resume. That's a great idea. But go look at what the company does, beyond even what they're asking for. Look at their web pages. What are they focusing on? You know, look at the size of the company just to get familiar with it. Is it, you know, a $3 billion company? Is it a $100 million company, if you can find that? Kind of look at maybe who their leadership is. Look at their stock so you know how the company's been doing. That's going to be important to you if you go to that company because it'll affect your bottom line too. So all these things sort of seem irrelevant, but they can be really helpful because in the interview, again, you'll know more about the company, and some questions will come up maybe when they're talking about something, and it's somehow different than what you thought when you looked at the web. And you never know what those things are going to be, but if you've done some of that research, you'll have that background. You'll be able to customize and really sort of on the fly figure out questions to ask, or things will come up that you'll hear them talking about. So yeah, spend time looking at their web pages and learning about the company. What's the company culture? I mean, many of you are older than average students, right? So you sort of know that your work environment matters and company cultures can affect your work environment. So that's something you want to learn about. You can get a lot from the web, believe it or not. And then when you go to the interview, you say, that actually seems similar to the web. When I looked at the web, I didn't feel good about it. In this interview, I don't, or vice versa. On the web, I just thought, wow, that's a place I want to work. And then you meet this person and you're interacting with them and you feel like even more, I want to work at that company.
What's your company culture like here? I mean, seriously, I know it's a direct question, but I mean, that's not an uncommon question for people to ask, right?
Want to answer? Okay, Cardi's going to answer.
So I was interviewing someone recently, and the person actually went around and said to the people who were interviewing, how long have you been at this place and why are you at this place? What is it that makes you stay in the current job and why are you where you are? Tell us.
So I think both. I think asking the direct question is great, but that's a good one to get at it too, is why do you work at this company? What do you like?
I would also ask if you have the opportunity to see if you can take a tour on the office so then you can see it for yourself. because they can tell you one thing, but the office environment might be completely different.
Yeah, and I think a lot of companies really care a lot about their culture, especially the tech companies, because it is pretty competitive. So people put a lot of effort into building the culture at the company. And so they're probably going to try and really sell you on the culture, actually. And so I suggest the same thing. Try to talk to people and take a tour, because that really will tell you a lot. So
I'd like to give another, I think there's a really good thing is actually get to see the people and see what's going on. The thing is, even if they gave you a truthful answer, are you an anthropologist? And even if you are an anthropologist, are they?
We did have a lot.
We did, yeah. I admit there were a few. Yeah. But even for you guys, are they anthropologists? Do you have a common vocabulary on what the heck a culture is? The answer is probably no. Although I agree it's a good question to ask, because, there might be a connection. You might be able to understand what they're saying, but there's a good chance they'll go blah, 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 and you'll say, oh, okay, it's here. But even though they're being totally truthful, given their vocabulary, their understanding, it's quite possible the culture's over there. I mean, this is difficult stuff to get across, even for people trained in that subject, and most of us aren't.
I've asked before in interviews, what does an average day look like at your job? And that personalizes it for the interviewer, I think, and makes them actually, you kind of get the quirks of do they like this certain part of their job or not from what they're conveying to you, and it kind of gives you a little bit of an insight into what it's like at that job.
I was actually really surprised by that. I thought that I would get some of those soft questions, and sure, I got a few, but I didn't feel like they cared much at all about my previous life, and I did get the technical questions, but I was interviewing for more entry-level positions, so I wasn't getting super advanced technical questions, but definitely the technical questions. I got questions about, Java, specific questions about Java. I did one phone interview where they opened up a web sharing application, and so I actually typed out a solution to a problem in pseudocode. So that was one thing.
So just being an observer and seeing all of you through the last 2 years, your maturity and experience comes out. You don't actually need to ask any questions about it. So I think, it's like what they're really trying to do is because the way you communicate, you experience, the experience comes out and comes through. So I would guess, usually they're trying to say, oh, okay, do you have these skills or this knowledge or this ability to learn what we're going to be doing? So I'm not surprised that you get that, because it all comes out as you start talking. You get that sense. Okay, so that's probably a good place to stop.